The gunshot echoed through the valley just as Levi Quinn's horse crested the hill overlooking Yankton, South Dakota, and he knew without a doubt that someone down in that dusty town was either celebrating or dying. It was September of 1878, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the weathered planks of the railroad platform below, where a small crowd had gathered in a half-circle around something Levi could not quite make out from this distance. He urged his mare forward, the leather of his saddle creaking as they descended the rocky slope toward the town he had called home for the better part of 3 years. The cattle drive from Wyoming had taken nearly 2 months, and every muscle in his body ached for a hot bath and a soft bed, but something about that gathering crowd made his gut twist with an instinct he had learned never to ignore. As he drew closer, the scene on the platform began to take shape. The crowd was not gathered around a body or a gunfight as he had feared, but around a young woman sitting on a worn trunk, her dress covered in dust and what looked like days of hard travel. She was cradling something in her arms, rocking gently back and forth, and even from 30 yards away, Levi could see the fierce protectiveness in the way she held herself. The train that had presumably brought her sat idle on the tracks, steam still hissing from its great iron belly, and the conductor stood nearby with his arms crossed, looking both impatient and uncomfortable. Levi dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post outside the general store, his spurs jingling as he walked toward the platform. The crowd parted slightly as he approached, recognizing him as one of their own, and that was when he got his first clear look at her face. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, with honey-colored hair that had mostly escaped its pins to hang in tangled waves around her shoulders. Her eyes were a striking shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds over the prairie, and they were bright with unshed tears that she seemed determined not to let fall. In her arms was a baby, wrapped in a blanket that had once been white but was now streaked with dirt and what might have been soot. "Miss, I have told you 3 times now," the conductor was saying, his voice strained with barely concealed irritation. "You cannot stay on this platform. If you have no money for lodging and no one meeting you, then you will have to move along." "I have nowhere to move along to," the woman said, and her voice was steady despite the tears threatening to spill. It was a cultured voice, educated, with the faintest trace of an Eastern accent that marked her as decidedly not from these parts. "I was told there would be a position waiting for me here. I was told a family needed a governess." "Well, there is no family here to meet you," the conductor said, "and I cannot leave you sitting here. It is not proper and it is not safe." Levi stepped forward then, removing his hat as he did. "Is there a problem here, Jim?" The conductor turned, relief washing over his weathered face. "Levi, thank God. Maybe you can talk some sense into this young lady. She came in on the afternoon train from Sioux City, claims she was supposed to have a position here, but nobody has come to collect her." Levi looked down at the woman, who was now looking up at him with a mixture of defiance and desperation that tugged at something deep in his chest. The baby in her arms was sleeping, its tiny face peaceful despite the chaos around it. "What is your name, miss?" "Beatrice," she said after a moment. "Beatrice Randall, and this is Clara." She adjusted the blanket around the baby's face with a gentleness that spoke of deep love. "I answered an advertisement 3 months ago. A family in Yankton needed a governess for their children. They sent me money for passage and told me to arrive by the end of September. I sold everything I had to make the journey." "What family?" Levi asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. "The Hutchinsons," Beatrice said. "Mr. and Mrs. Edward Hutchinson." A murmur went through the small crowd, and Levi felt his jaw tighten. He knew the Hutchinsons. Everyone in Yankton knew the Hutchinsons. Edward Hutchinson had been a prosperous rancher with political ambitions and a wife who fancied herself above the rough society of a frontier town. They had 3 children and had often spoken of hiring a proper governess to educate them in the manner of Eastern families, but that had been before the fever. "Miss Randall," Levi said gently, crouching down so he was at eye level with her, "I am afraid I have some difficult news." The Hutchinson family was struck by scarlet fever 6 weeks ago. Mrs. Hutchinson and the 2 youngest children passed away. Mr. Hutchinson and his eldest boy survived, but they left Yankton 3 weeks ago to return to his family in Ohio. "I am sorry. There is no position waiting for you here." The color drained from Beatrice's face, and for a moment Levi thought she might faint. Her arms tightened around the baby, and she closed her eyes as if willing the world to disappear. When she opened them again, the tears had finally begun to fall, tracking clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. "I have $4 to my name," she whispered. $4 and a baby who is not even mine by blood. What am I supposed to do?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably, and Levi could feel their sympathy mixed with their wariness. Yankton was not a cruel town, but it was a practical one. Resources were limited, and everyone had their own struggles. There was no organized charity, no place for a lone woman with a baby to simply appear and expect to be taken care of. He should walk away. He should offer her the name of the boarding house and maybe $1 or 2 to help her get started, then mount his horse and ride to his ranch and forget he ever saw her. That would be the sensible thing to do. Instead, he heard himself say, "Then we are 3. Beatrice looked up at him, confusion replacing some of the despair in her eyes. "What? You, me, and the little one," Levi said, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. "You need a place to stay and work to support yourself. I have a ranch 10 miles outside of town that needs a woman's touch. My housekeeper left 2 months ago to care for her sick sister in Missouri, and I have been living like a bachelor fool ever since. The house is a mess, the cooking is terrible, and I could use help with the books and correspondence. If you are willing to work, I am willing to offer you room, board, and a fair wage." The crowd was silent now, watching this exchange with the avid interest of people who knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for weeks to come. Beatrice stared at Levi as if trying to determine whether he was genuine or simply insane. "You do not even know me," she said finally. "I could be anyone. I could be a thief or a fraud or worse." "You could be," Levi agreed. "But I have been reading people and animals for 25 years, and I trust my instincts. You are desperate, but you are not dangerous. And that baby needs a roof over her head tonight." "Why would you do this?" Beatrice asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why would you help a complete stranger?" Levi stood up and replaced his hat on his head, then offered her his hand. "Because someone helped me once when I had nothing, and I have spent the last 10 years trying to be worthy of that kindness. Now, are you going to sit here arguing with me, or are you going to let me take you somewhere safe before dark?" For a long moment, Beatrice did not move. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and cold in his calloused palm, and when she stood up, he realized she was much shorter than he had thought, barely reaching his shoulder. She was thin too, he noticed, as if she had not been eating properly for some time. The baby stirred in her arms but did not wake. "I will work harder than any housekeeper you have ever had," Beatrice said fiercely, looking up at him with those storm cloud eyes. "I promise you will not regret this." "I am sure I will not," Levi said, though part of him was already wondering what exactly he had just committed himself to. He turned to the conductor. "Jim, can you help me load Miss Randall's trunk onto my horse?" 20 minutes later, they were heading out of town. Beatrice riding behind Levi on his mare with the baby held securely between them, and the trunk tied onto a pack horse that Levi had borrowed from the livery with a promise to return it in the morning. The sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, and the air had that particular quality of early autumn in South Dakota, crisp and clean and full of promise. "Tell me about the baby," Levi said after they had ridden in silence for a while. "You said she is not yours by blood." Beatrice was quiet for a moment, and Levi felt her shift slightly behind him, adjusting Clara in her arms. "Clara is my sister's daughter," she said finally. "My sister Margaret married a man in Chicago last year. He seemed kind at first, but after they were married, he became cruel. He drank heavily and had debts he had hidden from her. When Margaret became pregnant, she tried to make the best of it, but he only grew worse. He blamed her for everything, said the baby was a burden they could not afford." Levi felt his hands tighten on the reins, but he said nothing, letting her continue. "Margaret died in childbirth," Beatrice continued, and her voice was thick with grief. "The midwife said it was hemorrhaging, that nothing could have been done, but I have always wondered if the stress and fear hastened it. Her husband took one look at Clara and said he wanted nothing to do with her. He told me to take the baby and leave, that he was done with both of us. So I did. I took Clara and what little money Margaret had hidden away, and I left Chicago. I could not stay there, not in the same city as that man, not where everything reminded me of my sister." "What about your parents?" Levi asked gently. "Other family, dead," Beatrice said simply. "Our parents died in a fire when I was 16 and Margaret was 18. We had an aunt who took us in, but she passed away 2 years ago. It has just been the two of us for a long time, and now it is just me and Clara. When I saw the advertisement for the governess position in Yankton, it seemed like providence. A chance to start over somewhere no one knew us, where I could raise Clara away from the ugliness of the city. And now here you are," Levi said. "On the back of a horse with a stranger, heading to a ranch you have never seen." "Yes," Beatrice said, and he heard a faint note of wry humor in her voice. "I seem to be making a habit of trusting the wrong people. I hope you prove to be an exception to that pattern." "I hope so too," Levi said, and realized he meant it more than he had ever meant anything. They rode on as the sun continued its descent, and Levi found himself acutely aware of Beatrice's presence behind him, the way her body moved with the rhythm of the horse, the occasional soft sound she made when Clara shifted in her arms. He had not been this close to a woman in a long time, not since Sarah had left him 3 years ago, taking his heart and his trust with her. Sarah had been a merchant's daughter from town, beautiful and charming, and Levi had been fool enough to believe she loved him for who he was rather than what she hoped he would become. When she realized that he was content being a rancher, that he had no ambitions to become wealthy or powerful or anything other than what he already was, she had left him for a banker in Sioux Falls. He had not courted anyone since, but this was different, he told himself. This was not courtship. This was simple human decency, offering help to someone who needed it. The fact that Beatrice was lovely despite her bedraggled state, that her voice did something strange to his pulse, that he could smell the faint scent of lavender in her hair despite the dust and grime of travel, all of that was irrelevant. She was his employee now, nothing more. The ranch came into view as the last rays of sunlight touched the tops of the distant Black Hills. It was not a large spread by the standards of some of the bigger operations in the territory, but it was respectable. 200 acres of good grazing land, a sturdy 2-story house built from local timber and stone, a barn that could hold 20 horses, and several outbuildings in various states of repair. Levi had bought the land 5 years ago with money saved from years of working cattle drives, and he had built most of the structures with his own hands. It was his pride and his refuge, the one thing in his life that had never disappointed him. But as they rode up to the house, he tried to see it through Beatrice's eyes, and he winced. The porch was covered in dust and dead leaves. The windows were streaked and dirty. The front door hung slightly crooked on its hinges, something he had been meaning to fix for weeks. Inside, he knew, would be even worse. Dishes piled in the kitchen, clothes strewn about, papers and account books scattered across every surface. He had been living alone for too long, and it showed. "It needs work," he said as he dismounted and then helped Beatrice down, being careful not to jostle the baby. "I know it does not look like much right now, but the structure is sound, and once it is cleaned up, it is actually quite comfortable." Beatrice looked up at the house, and Levi could not read her expression in the gathering darkness. Then she turned to him and said, "It looks like a home. That is more than I have had in a very long time." Something in his chest tightened at those words, and he found himself smiling despite his exhaustion. "Come on," he said. "Let me show you inside and get you settled. You must be hungry." The interior of the house was exactly as bad as he had feared. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and a wooden table and chairs sitting in the center of the space. Every surface was covered in the accumulated mess of a man living alone. Empty cans, dirty plates, tools, pieces of tack that needed mending, old newspapers. A pot sat on the stove with something congealed and unidentifiable inside it. Beatrice stepped inside and looked around, and Levi waited for her to turn around and walk right back out. Instead, she set her jaw in a way that reminded him of soldiers he had known during his brief stint in the army, men facing an impossible task with nothing but determination. "Where can I put Clara down?" she asked. "Upstairs," Levi said, leading the way. "There are 3 bedrooms up here. Mine, a guest room, and a smaller room that I have been using for storage. You can have the guest room. It has a bed and a dresser, and I think there are clean sheets somewhere." The guest room was at the end of a short hallway, and thankfully it was in better shape than the downstairs. The bed was made, if somewhat dusty, and the dresser stood empty and ready. A window looked out over the prairie, and Levi could imagine it would have a beautiful view in the morning light. "This will be perfect," Beatrice said softly. She laid Clara gently on the bed, building a nest of pillows around her so she would not roll. The baby stirred and made a small sound but did not wake. "She is such a good baby," Beatrice murmured, more to herself than to Levi. "She has been through so much already, but she hardly ever cries." "How old is she?" Levi asked from the doorway. 4 months, Beatrice said, smoothing the blanket over Clara's small form. "She was born in May. Margaret lived long enough to hold her and name her, at least. That is something." Levi wanted to say something comforting, but words had never been his strong suit, so instead he just nodded. "I will go see what I can find for dinner. There is a wash basin in the corner there if you want to clean up." Downstairs, he surveyed the kitchen with a critical eye and felt a surge of embarrassment. He had let things slide badly in the last few months. The cattle drive had required all his attention, and before that, he had simply fallen into bad habits. He cleared the table, washed some plates and utensils, and managed to find some eggs, bacon, and bread that was only slightly stale. It was not much, but it would have to do. He was frying the bacon when Beatrice came down the stairs. She had washed her face and hands and tried to tame her hair back into some semblance of order, though several strands still escaped to frame her face. In the lamplight, he could see that she had a sprinkling of freckles across her nose and that her lips were fuller than he had initially noticed. She was truly beautiful, he realized, in a way that had nothing to do with artifice or fashion and everything to do with the strength and intelligence that shone from her eyes. "Can I help?" she asked. "You can sit down and rest," Levi said. "You have been traveling all day." "I have been sitting all day," Beatrice countered. "I would rather be useful." She looked around the kitchen, her gaze taking in the mess with a practical eye. "Where do you keep your dishes?" "That cabinet there," Levi said, pointing with the fork he was using to turn the bacon. "But really, Miss Randall, you do not need to start working tonight. Tomorrow is soon enough." "It is Beatrice," she said, already moving to the cabinet and beginning to take stock of its contents. "And I would rather keep busy. It helps me not to think too much." Levi understood that sentiment all too well, so he said nothing more, just focused on cooking the eggs while Beatrice began organizing the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had spent years managing a household. They worked in companionable silence, and within 20 minutes they were sitting at the now clear table with plates of hot food in front of them. "I cannot remember the last time I had a hot meal," Beatrice said after her first bite. "Thank you." "It is just eggs and bacon," Levi said, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It is more than that," Beatrice said quietly. "It is kindness when I had no reason to expect any. It is safety when I thought I had lost everything. Please let me thank you properly." Levi met her eyes across the table and saw the sincerity there, the deep well of emotion barely contained. He nodded. "You are welcome. But I meant what I said on the platform. This is not charity. I need help here and you need a place to stay. It is a fair arrangement." "I will make sure it is fair," Beatrice said with a small smile. "You will have the cleanest house and the best cooked meals in all of South Dakota. I promise you that." "I do not doubt it," Levi said, returning her smile. They finished their meal, and Levi showed Beatrice where everything was kept. The well out back for water, the outhouse beyond the barn, the woodpile for the stove and fireplace. She listened carefully to everything he said, asking intelligent questions and making mental notes. By the time he carried her trunk up to her room, it was full dark, and he could see the exhaustion pulling at her features. "Get some rest," he told her at the door to her room. "Tomorrow will be a long day, but we will take it slow. I have ranch business to attend to, but I will be around if you need anything." "Thank you, Levi," she said, and the sound of his name on her lips sent an unexpected warmth through him. "For everything." "Sleep well, Beatrice," he said, and then he retreated to his own room before he could say or do anything foolish. That night, as he lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of his house settling around him, Levi found himself thinking about the woman sleeping down the hall. He thought about the way she had held that baby with such fierce protectiveness, the way her chin had lifted with pride even when she was admitting to being nearly penniless, the way her eyes had filled with tears, but she had refused to let them fall until she thought no one was looking. She was strong, he realized, truly strong in a way that had nothing to do with physical might and everything to do with the strength of character. He had not meant to invite her here. He had not meant to append his carefully ordered solitary life. But now that she was here, he found he was glad of it in a way that had nothing to do with needing a housekeeper, and everything to do with the small spark of something he thought long dead that had flickered to life in his chest when she had taken his hand on that platform. It was dangerous, that spark. He knew it. But as he drifted off to sleep, Levi could not quite bring himself to care. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with a hint of frost on the ground that warned of the winter to come. Levi was up before the sun, as was his habit, and he went about his morning routine of feeding the horses and checking on the cattle that grazed in the near pastures. When he came back to the house an hour later, he found Beatrice already up and working in the kitchen. She had Clara strapped to her chest in a makeshift sling fashioned from a shawl, and she was elbow-deep in soapy water, washing dishes. The kitchen had been transformed in the short time since he had left. The table was scrubbed clean, the floor swept, and the stove polished until it shone. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and there was a plate of biscuits sitting on the table, still warm from the oven. "You have been busy," Levi said, hanging his hat by the door. Beatrice turned and offered him a tired smile. "I woke early and could not get back to sleep, so I thought I might as well make myself useful. I hope you do not mind that I went through your stores. I found flour and lard and some dried berries, so I made biscuits. They are not fancy, but they should be edible." Levi took one of the biscuits and bit into it. It was light and flaky and delicious, better than anything he had managed to produce in months. "These are wonderful," he said honestly. "You are a good cook." "I had to be," Beatrice said, turning back to the dishes. "When our parents died, Margaret and I had to fend for ourselves. I learned to make a meal out of very little and to make it taste good besides. It was a matter of survival." "Well, you certainly have a talent for it," Levi said, pouring himself a cup of coffee and sitting down at the table. He watched her work for a moment, noting the practiced efficiency of her movements, the way she managed to wash dishes while simultaneously rocking Clara, who was beginning to fuss slightly. "Does she need feeding?" "Soon," Beatrice said. "I have been nursing her myself since Margaret died. The doctor said it was possible if I was patient and persistent, and thankfully it worked. I was so afraid I would lose her too." Levi felt something twist in his chest at the thought of this young woman taking on the responsibility of nursing another woman's child, doing whatever it took to keep that baby alive. "You are remarkable," he said before he could stop himself. Beatrice looked over at him, surprise and something else flickering in her eyes. "I am not remarkable. I am just doing what needs to be done." "That is what makes you remarkable," Levi said quietly. For a moment, their eyes held across the kitchen, and Levi felt that spark again, stronger this time. Then Clara let out a proper cry, and the moment was broken. Beatrice dried her hands quickly and disappeared upstairs with the baby, leaving Levi alone with his coffee and his thoughts. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that surprised Levi with how quickly it became comfortable. Beatrice threw herself into the work of managing the household with a determination that bordered on ferocious. She scrubbed every surface until it gleamed, organized every closet and cupboard, mended clothes and linens that had been neglected for months. She learned Levi's preferences and routines without being asked, always having coffee ready when he came in from the morning chores, always having hot water for washing up after a long day of work. But more than that, she brought life back to the house. She sang while she worked, old songs that Levi half remembered from his childhood. She talked to Clara constantly, narrating everything she was doing, telling the baby stories about her mother, about the world they lived in, about the dreams she had for their future. She filled vases with the last wildflowers of the season and placed them on the windowsills. She baked bread that made the whole house smell like comfort and home. And slowly, carefully, she and Levi began to talk. At first it was just practical matters, discussions about what supplies were needed, what repairs should be prioritized, how to manage the ranch accounts. But gradually, as the days passed, their conversations deepened. They talked about their pasts, their families, their hopes and fears. Levi found himself telling her things he had never told anyone, about his childhood in Missouri, about the war that had stolen his youth and left scars he still carried, about Sarah, and the way her betrayal had made him doubt his own judgment. Beatrice listened without judgment, offering observations that were both insightful and kind. In turn, she told him more about her life with Margaret, about the struggles they had faced as two young women alone in the world, about the aunt who had been kind but distant, about the dreams she had harbored of a different life before everything fell apart. "I wanted to be a teacher," she confessed one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set over the prairie. Clara was sleeping peacefully in a basket at Beatrice's feet, and the air was full of the sound of crickets and the distant call of coyotes. "I loved learning, loved books and history and mathematics. I thought if I could become a teacher, I could help other girls like me and Margaret, girls who had no one else to champion them." "You still could," Levi said. "Yankton needs a school teacher, old Mrs. Henderson has been teaching the children for 15 years, but she is getting on in years. I am sure they would welcome someone new." Beatrice shook her head. "That was a dream from another life. Now I have Clara to think about. I need stable work that will allow me to care for her, not a position that requires me to be away from her all day." "What if there was a way to do both?" Levi asked. The idea had just occurred to him, but the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. "What if you taught here at the ranch? There are at least half a dozen families within 10 miles who have children. They are too spread out for a regular school, but if you were willing to teach them here a few days a week, I am sure their parents would pay for it. Clara could be with you the whole time, and you would be helping those children get an education they would not otherwise have." Beatrice turned to look at him, her eyes wide. "Do you really think that could work?" "I do not see why not," Levi said. "We could clear out the small room upstairs, set it up as a schoolroom. It would not be fancy, but it would be functional. And those children need someone like you, someone who actually cares about teaching them and not just keeping them quiet and out of trouble." "It would be wonderful," Beatrice said softly, and Levi could see the dream rekindling in her eyes. "To teach again, to feel useful in that way. But it would be a lot of work for you, converting that room, dealing with children coming and going." "I think I can handle it," Levi said with a smile. "Besides, it would be good to have young voices around the place. It has been too quiet for too long." That night, Levi lay in bed and acknowledged what he had been trying to ignore for weeks. He was falling in love with Beatrice Randall. It was not just her beauty, though she was lovely, especially now that she had rested and recovered from her journey. It was not just her competence, though he admired the way she tackled every challenge with determination and grace. It was everything about her. The way she laughed at his dry jokes. The way she sang to Clara in the evenings. The way she looked at the prairie as if seeing magic in every blade of grass. The way she made him want to be a better man, to build a better life, to dream dreams he had long ago abandoned. But he could not tell her. Not yet. She was his employee, dependent on him for her livelihood and her safety. To declare his feelings would be to put her in an impossible position. She might feel obligated to reciprocate even if she did not share his sentiments, or worse, she might feel she had to leave if she did not. He could not risk either outcome. So he would wait, he decided. He would wait and hope that time would reveal whether the feelings growing in him had any echo in her heart. October arrived with a cold snap that frosted the windows and turned the prairie grass brown and brittle. Levi spent his days preparing the ranch for winter, making sure the barn was secure, the fences mended, the firewood stacked high. Beatrice worked alongside him when she could, helping to haul wood and repair tack while Clara napped in her basket or played on a blanket spread in the autumn sunshine. They were working together in the barn one afternoon, sorting through tack and deciding what needed to be replaced before winter truly set in, when Beatrice suddenly spoke up. "Can I ask you something personal?" Levi looked up from the bridle he was examining. "Of course." "Why did you never marry?" Beatrice asked, her fingers busy with a piece of leather she was working oil into. "You have a good ranch, you are well respected in town, you are kind and decent. Surely there have been women interested. Levi was quiet for a moment, considering how much to tell her. Then he decided on honesty. There was someone once. Her name was Sarah. I thought we would marry, thought we had a future together, but she wanted things I could not give her. Wealth, status, a life in a city somewhere. When she realized I was happy here, content with what I had built, she left me for someone who could give her those things. She was a fool, Beatrice said fiercely, looking up from her work. Levi felt something warm spread through his chest at her vehemence. Perhaps. Or perhaps we just were not right for each other. Either way, it left me wary. I decided it was better to be alone than to give my heart to someone who did not value it properly. And now, Beatrice asked softly, do you still feel that way? Levi met her eyes across the dim barn, and for a moment he considered telling her everything, laying his heart bare and accepting whatever came of it. But fear held him back, fear of rejection, fear of losing what they already had. Now I think that being alone is not the same as being lonely, he said carefully. And I think that the right person might be worth the risk if she ever came along. Something flickered in Beatrice's eyes, something that might have been hope or might have been disappointment. Before he could decipher it, she looked back down at her work. I hope you find her, she said quietly. You deserve to be happy, Levi. So do you, he said, and meant it with his whole heart. In early November, Levi made good on his promise to help Beatrice set up a schoolroom. They spent a weekend clearing out the small room upstairs, hauling out old furniture and boxes of accumulated junk. Levi built a bookshelf and several small desks and chairs from rough lumber, and Beatrice sewed cushions for the chairs and curtains for the window. Word spread quickly through the community, and before long, 5 families had signed their children up for lessons 3 days a week. The first day of school was a cold Tuesday morning, and Beatrice was so nervous she could barely eat breakfast. What if they do not like me? She fretted, pacing the kitchen with Clara on her hip. What if I have forgotten how to teach? What if their parents change their minds? They will love you, Levi said with a confidence he absolutely felt. You were born to do this, Beatrice. Trust yourself. 8 children arrived that morning, ranging in age from 6 to 13. They were shy at first, unsure of this new teacher and this unfamiliar place. But Beatrice worked her magic, gently drawing them out with stories and questions, making learning feel like an adventure rather than a chore. By the time Levi came in at noon to check on them, the room was alive with excited voices as the children worked on their lessons. You were right, Beatrice told him that evening, after the last child had been collected by their parents and the house was quiet again. I was meant to do this. I felt more like myself today than I have in years. I am glad, Levi said, and he was. The joy in her face was worth all the work it had taken to make this happen. As November gave way to December, the first real snow came, blanketing the prairie in white and transforming the ranch into a winter wonderland. The schoolchildren could not come during the worst of the weather, but on clear days they trudged through the snow with the determination of young scholars, and Beatrice taught them with a passion that made Levi fall even more deeply in love with her. It was during one of those snowy evenings, sitting by the fire after dinner while Beatrice rocked Clara to sleep, that Levi realized he could not keep his feelings hidden any longer. The need to tell her, to know if she might feel even a fraction of what he felt, was becoming unbearable. But he had to be careful. He had to give her the opportunity to refuse without feeling pressured or uncomfortable. Beatrice, he said, his voice rougher than usual. She looked up from Clara, her face soft in the firelight. Yes, there is a dance in town next week. The Christmas social. It is a tradition here. Everyone in the county comes. There is music and food and general merriment. I was wondering if you might like to go with me. Beatrice's expression was unreadable. As your employee, as my friend, Levi said carefully. And perhaps, if you were willing, as something more. I know I have no right to ask. You are dependent on me for your position and your home, and I do not want you to feel any obligation. But I would be dishonest if I did not tell you that my feelings for you have grown beyond those of an employer. You have become important to me, Beatrice. You and Clara both. If you do not share those feelings, we will never speak of it again, and nothing here will change. But if you do, if there is any chance you might, I would like the opportunity to court you properly. Beatrice was silent for a long moment, her hand stilled on Clara's back. Then, slowly, she smiled. It was a beautiful smile, full of warmth and relief and something that looked remarkably like love. I thought you would never ask, she said softly. I have been half in love with you since the day you offered to help me on that platform, and I have been fighting it because I was afraid it was one-sided, that you saw me only as an employee or a responsibility. Levi felt something in his chest loosen, something he had not even realized was tight. You are so much more than that, he said, standing and crossing to where she sat. He knelt beside her chair, taking her free hand in his. You are the light that came back into my life when I thought I would spend the rest of my days in darkness. You are laughter and song and the smell of bread baking. You are everything I did not know I was missing. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. And you are safety, she whispered. You are kindness when the world was cruel. You are the home I never thought I would find. I love you, Levi Quinn. I think I have loved you almost from the beginning. Then we are three, Levi said, echoing his words from that first day. You and me and Clara, a family. A family, Beatrice repeated, and then she leaned down and kissed him. It was a soft kiss, gentle and tentative, the first touch of two people learning each other. But it held the promise of passion to come, of years of kisses and touches and intimacy. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. I should put Clara to bed, Beatrice said, but she did not move. You should, Levi agreed, but he did not let go of her hand. They stayed like that for a while longer, just holding hands and looking at each other in the firelight, the baby sleeping peacefully between them. It was the beginning of something, Levi knew, something important and lasting and real. The Christmas social was everything Levi had promised and more. The entire town had turned out, crowding into the church hall that had been decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons. There was a band playing fiddle music, tables groaning under the weight of contributed dishes, and an atmosphere of joy and celebration that was infectious. Levi and Beatrice arrived together, with Clara bundled up in her warmest clothes and looking around at everything with wide, curious eyes. The reaction to their appearance was immediate and unmistakable. Eyebrows rose, whispers started, and more than one knowing smile was exchanged. But Levi did not care. He was proud to have Beatrice on his arm, proud to introduce her not as his housekeeper, but as the woman he was courting. They danced together, Levi's hand firm on her waist, Beatrice following his lead with grace, despite her claim that she was not a good dancer. They talked with neighbors and friends, Beatrice charming everyone she met with her warmth and intelligence. They ate and laughed and celebrated, and for the first time in years, Levi felt truly, completely happy. It was late in the evening, when the party was beginning to wind down and many of the children had fallen asleep on benches and in their parents' arms, that Beatrice pulled Levi aside. "Take a walk with me," she said. "I want to talk to you about something." They bundled up and stepped out into the cold night air, leaving Clara with Mrs. Jenkins, an older woman who had volunteered to watch the sleeping children. The snow crunched under their feet as they walked away from the church, and their breath steamed in the frigid air. "What did you want to talk about?" Levi asked, though he felt a flutter of nerves in his stomach. Beatrice was quiet for a moment, looking up at the stars that filled the sky, brilliant and close in the clear winter night. "I want to make sure you understand what you are taking on," she said finally. "Clara is part of this. If you and I are to have a future together, she is part of that future. She will always be my daughter, my responsibility. I need to know that you are prepared for that you truly want that." Levi stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Beatrice, I told you that first day that we were 3, I meant it. I am not just courting you, I am courting the family we could be together. I want to be a father to Clara. I want to teach her to ride and to read and to navigate this world. I want to protect her and provide for her and love her as if she were my own. Because she will be my own if you will have me." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears again, but she was smiling. "You are too good to be true, Levi Quinn." "I am just a man who knows a blessing when he sees one," Levi said. "And you and Clara are the greatest blessing I have ever received." They kissed then, standing in the snow under the stars, and it was even better than the first time. It was a kiss full of promise and passion, a kiss that spoke of a future filled with love and laughter and all the messy, beautiful chaos of family. Winter deepened, and the ranch became a world unto itself, cut off from town by snowdrifts and frozen roads. But inside the house, there was warmth and light and a happiness that seemed to fill every corner. Levi and Beatrice grew closer every day, learning each other's habits and quirks, sharing confidences and dreams, building the foundation of a life together. Clara, meanwhile, was growing and changing with the remarkable speed of babies. She learned to sit up on her own, to grab at toys and put everything in her mouth, to laugh at Levi's silly faces. He found himself completely enchanted by her, this tiny person who had come into his life by chance and captured his heart completely. "You are good with her," Beatrice observed one evening, watching as Levi carefully spooned mashed vegetables into Clara's mouth. "A natural father." "I never thought I would have children," Levi admitted. "After Sarah left, I assumed that part of life was closed to me, but now I cannot imagine my life without this little one." He made a funny face and Clara giggled, spraying vegetable puree across his shirt. "Even when she is messy," he added with a laugh. "I want more," Beatrice said suddenly, and there was a vulnerability in her voice that made Levi look up sharply. "Children, I mean. I do not want Clara to grow up alone the way Margaret and I did. I want her to have siblings, to have a big, noisy family, but I do not know if you want that, if one child is already more than you bargained for." Levi set down the spoon and reached across the table to take her hand. "I want everything with you," he said seriously. "A house full of children and noise and chaos, brothers and sisters for Clara. A life so full of love that we can barely contain it. Is that what you want too?" "Yes," Beatrice whispered. "More than anything." "Then that is what we will have," Levi promised. Christmas came and went in a flurry of simple gifts and quiet celebration. Levi carved a small wooden horse for Clara, who promptly tried to eat it. Beatrice knitted him a scarf in shades of blue and gray that perfectly matched his eyes. They spent the day together, just the 3 of them, cooking a feast and sitting by the fire and counting their blessings. By the time spring began to show its first tentative signs in March, Levi knew he could not wait any longer. He had a ring, a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother, and he had a plan. It was a cool Saturday morning, and he had convinced Beatrice to come with him on a ride across the prairie, leaving Clara with Mrs. Jenkins in town. They rode out to his favorite spot, a small rise that overlooked the entire ranch, where you could see for miles in every direction. "Why did you bring me here?" Beatrice asked as they dismounted. "Because this is where I come when I need to think," Levi said. When I bought this land, I came here and stood on this spot and imagined what I could build. A home, a life, something that mattered, and I have built it. But it was not complete, not until you came. He pulled the ring from his pocket and dropped to one knee, taking her hand in his. Beatrice Randall, you came into my life when I least expected it, and you changed everything. You brought light and laughter and love into a house that had known only loneliness. You gave me a daughter to cherish and a purpose beyond mere survival. I do not want to spend another day without knowing that you are mine and I am yours. Will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband and Clara's father? Will you build this life with me? Beatrice was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling that beautiful smile that never failed to make his heart race. Yes, she said. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. I will marry you, Levi Quinn. I will be your wife and your partner and the mother of your children. I will love you for all the days of my life. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and passion he had been holding back. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless and laughing. When? Beatrice asked. When should we marry? As soon as possible, Levi said. I have waited long enough for happiness. I do not want to wait any longer. They were married 3 weeks later in the same church where they had attended the Christmas social. It was a small ceremony, just a handful of friends and neighbors, but it was perfect. Beatrice wore a simple dress of pale blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and Levi wore his best suit, the one he had bought years ago and never had occasion to wear. Clara was there too, dressed in a white gown that Beatrice had sewn herself, serving as the world's youngest and most adorable witness. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Levi kissed his bride, there was not a dry eye in the church. And when they walked out into the spring sunshine as a married couple, Clara in Levi's arms and Beatrice at his side, they were met with cheers and well wishes and a shower of flower petals. The reception was held at the ranch, and it felt right to celebrate the beginning of their married life in the place that had brought them together. There was food and music and dancing, and at one point Levi found himself standing on the porch, watching his wife twirl around the yard with Clara in her arms, both of them laughing in the sunlight. He was joined by Tom Mitchell, a neighboring rancher and one of his few close friends. "You are a lucky man, Levi," Tom said, accepting the glass of whiskey Levi offered him. "I know it," Levi said, unable to take his eyes off Beatrice. "She is a fine woman, and that little one is lucky too to have found a father like you." "I am the lucky one," Levi said. "They saved me, Tom. I was just going through the motions before they came. Now I am actually living." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "That is what a good woman does for a man. That is what love does. Cherish it, Levi. Not everyone gets to have it." "I will," Levi promised. "Every single day of my life." That night, after all the guests had gone home and Clara was sleeping peacefully in her crib, Levi and Beatrice stood together in their bedroom, which had once been just his, but was now truly theirs. There was a nervousness between them, the natural awkwardness of a wedding night, but there was also love and trust and a deep desire to fully become husband and wife in every way. "Are you scared?" Beatrice asked, her fingers working at the buttons of her dress. "Terrified," Levi admitted with a small laugh. "But only because I want this to be perfect for you, and I am afraid I will mess it up somehow." Beatrice stepped closer to him, placing her hand over his heart. "It will be perfect because we are together. That is all that matters." And she was right. Their coming together that night was tender and passionate, awkward in moments but ultimately beautiful. It was the joining not just of bodies but of hearts and souls, the final sealing of the vows they had made that morning. When they finally lay together in the darkness, tangled in sheets in each other's arms, Levi felt a completeness he had never known was possible. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I love you too," she whispered back. "My husband, my home." The years that followed were full and rich and occasionally challenging, as all good lives are. Beatrice continued to teach. The little school she had started growing to accommodate more students as word of her talent spread. Levi expanded the ranch, adding more cattle and building new structures, creating a legacy he could pass down to his children. And there were more children. 10 months after their wedding, Beatrice gave birth to a son, whom they named Lucas Edward, after Levi's father and Beatrice's sister Margaret's husband, though they never told the latter part to anyone. Lucas was a healthy, robust baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue-gray eyes, and he became Clara's devoted shadow from the moment he was old enough to crawl. 2 years later came another daughter, whom they named Emma Grace. She had red gold hair that neither parent could account for, and a temperament as fiery as her coloring suggested. She kept them on their toes from the day she was born, and Levi often joked that she would be the death of him, though everyone could see the absolute adoration in his eyes when he said it. The final addition to their family came 4 years after that, another boy they named Samuel James. He was the quietest of their children, thoughtful and gentle, with a love of books and learning that reminded Levi of his wife. Samuel was Beatrice's baby, the child she doted on perhaps a bit more than the others, though she loved them all fiercely. Through it all, Levi and Beatrice's love for each other only deepened. They had their disagreements, as all couples do. They had hard times when money was tight or illness struck, or the harsh Dakota winters seemed like they would never end. But they faced everything together, as partners and best friends, and they never once doubted the choice they had made on that platform so many years ago. Clara grew up knowing that Levi was not her birth father, but she never felt anything but completely loved by him. He was the one who taught her to ride a horse at age 6, who walked her to her first day of school when Beatrice had to stay home with the baby, who sat up with her through a terrible fever when she was 9 and refused to leave her side until it broke. And when she was older, when boys started coming around and she had her first heartbreak, it was Levi's shoulder she cried on and Levi's wisdom she sought. "You are my papa in every way that matters," she told him once, when she was 15 and trying to understand her place in the family. "The man who helped create me is nothing to me. You are my father." Levi had hugged her close, unable to speak past the lump in his throat, and silently thanked whatever force had brought this remarkable girl into his life. Time passed, as it always does. The children grew. The ranch prospered. Levi's hair began to gray at the temples, and Beatrice's face developed laugh lines around her eyes and mouth. They watched their children find their own paths in life. Clara became a teacher like her mother, eventually taking over the school when Beatrice decided she wanted to focus on her growing family. Lucas took to ranching like he was born to it, working alongside his father from a young age and eventually becoming his full partner. Emma married a banker from Sioux Falls despite her parents' concerns, but she proved to be a shrewd judge of character, and her husband turned out to be a good and decent man who loved her fiercely. Samuel went to university in the East, studying law, but he returned to South Dakota to practice, unable to stay away from the land and family he loved. Through all the changes and challenges, through good times and hard times, Levi and Beatrice remained each other's constant. They still sat on the porch together in the evenings when weather allowed, watching the sun set over the prairie. They still danced in the kitchen when a particular song played on the gramophone they had splurged on for their 10th anniversary. They still held hands across the dinner table and stole kisses when they thought no one was looking, much to their children's amused embarrassment. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Levi took Beatrice back to the spot where he had proposed, the rise overlooking the ranch. It was a warm spring day, much like the day they had married, and the prairie was alive with wildflowers and new grass. "You remember that first day?" Levi asked, his arm around his wife's waist. "When you got off that train with Clara in your arms, looking so scared and defiant at the same time?" "I remember everything about that day," Beatrice said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I remember thinking my life was over, that I had made a terrible mistake, and I had no idea what I was going to do. And then you appeared like some kind of miracle and offered me hope when I had none left." "Then we are three," Levi quoted softly, repeating the words he had spoken that day. "I had no idea what I was committing to when I said that. I had no idea that those words would change my entire life." "Do you regret it?" Beatrice asked, though there was no real worry in her voice. She knew the answer. "Not for a single moment," Levi said firmly. "You and Clara and all our children, you are the best things that ever happened to me. You made me a better man than I ever thought I could be. You gave me a life worth living." "We gave each other that," Beatrice said, turning in his arms to face him. "I would not have survived without you, Levi. I would not have thrived. You saved me every bit as much as I saved you." "Then we saved each other," Levi said, and kissed her with all the love and passion of a man still deeply, hopelessly in love with his wife after 20 years of marriage. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out over the land they had built their life on. In the distance, they could see the ranch house, bigger now than it had been when they first met, with new wings added to accommodate their growing family. They could see the barn and the outbuildings, the corrals full of horses, the pastures dotted with cattle. They could see the school building, where a new generation of children was learning their letters and numbers. They could see the life they had created together, solid and real and enduring. And they could see their children and grandchildren, because yes, there were grandchildren now too. Clara had 3 children of her own, and Emma had just had her first baby. The ranch was often full of the sound of young voices and laughter, the patter of small feet running through the halls. It was everything Beatrice had dreamed of that night so long ago, when she had first admitted she wanted a big, noisy family. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Levi thought about the twists and turns that had brought him to this moment. If the Hutchinsons had not fallen ill, Beatrice would never have been stranded on that platform. If he had arrived in town an hour later, he might have missed her entirely. If he had not trusted his instincts and offered to help a complete stranger, his life would have taken a completely different path. But all of those things had happened exactly as they needed to. And the result was this life, this love, this family. It was not the life he had imagined for himself as a young man, full of adventure and glory. It was better. It was real and messy and imperfect and absolutely perfect all at once. "What are you thinking about?" Beatrice asked, sensing his contemplative mood. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Levi said. "How blessed, how grateful." "Me too," Beatrice said softly. "Every single day I wake up grateful for you and for this life we have built together." "Here is to 20 more years," Levi said, kissing her forehead. "At least 20, Beatrice agreed with a smile. "Probably 40. I plan on keeping you around for a very long time, Levi Quinn." "Good," Levi said, pulling her closer, "because I am not going anywhere. You are stuck with me for the rest of our lives." "That is exactly how I want it," Beatrice said. And then she kissed him again as the sun completed its descent, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. They stood there together, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a love that would endure long after they were gone. They had started as strangers on a train platform, brought together by circumstance and desperation. They had become friends, partners, lovers, spouses, parents, grandparents. They had become everything to each other. And it had all started with a cowboy who saw a woman in need and offered help without expectation of reward, who looked at a scared young mother and a tiny baby and said 4 simple words that would change all their lives forever. Then, we are 3. As Levi and Beatrice made their way back down the hill toward the ranch house, where their family waited with dinner and laughter and love, those words echoed in Levi's heart. They had been 3 that day on the platform. 3 people starting an unexpected journey together. And over the years they had become so much more. A family of 6, then a family with spouses and grandchildren, an ever-expanding circle of love and connection. But in his heart, they would always be 3. Him and Beatrice and Clara, the original family, the foundation on which everything else had been built. The miracle that had started with a single act of kindness and grown into a lifetime of love. And as they walked through the door of their home, greeted by the happy chaos of their gathered family, Levi sent up a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever power had brought Beatrice Randall into his life. She had been everything he did not know he needed. She had been his salvation and his joy. She had been, quite simply, the love of his life, and he had been hers. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting. Together, they had built a legacy of love that would endure for generations. Together, they had proved that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never see coming, the unexpected gifts that appear when you need them most. They had been 3. And then, they had been so much more. But through it all, through every change and challenge and triumph and heartbreak, they had been together. And that, Levi thought as he pulled out his wife's chair at the dinner table and exchanged a smile with her across the assembled faces of their beloved family, was all that really mattered in the end. The years continued to roll by as they always do, bringing both joys and sorrows. Levi's hair turned from gray to white, and Beatrice's movements became slower, more careful. They buried friends and celebrated weddings and welcomed more grandchildren into the world. The ranch remained in the family, passed down to Lucas and his children, but Levi and Beatrice stayed in the house they had made a home, refusing all offers to move somewhere easier or smaller. "I will leave this place when they carry me out," Levi said stubbornly when Lucas suggested they might be more comfortable in town. "Every board, every nail, every stone of this house has a memory. I am not giving that up." Beatrice agreed completely. This house was where they had fallen in love, where they had raised their children, where they had built their life together. It was sacred ground as far as she was concerned, and she had no intention of leaving it while she still had breath in her body. They were both in their 70s when Clara came to visit one summer day, bringing her own grandchildren with her. She was in her 50s now, her hair streaked with silver, but she still had the bright eyes and quick smile of the little girl Levi had first met so many years ago. After the children had been fed and sent out to play, Clara sat with her parents on the porch, watching the sun move slowly across the sky. "You remember the day we met?" Clara asked suddenly. "I know I was just a baby, but I have heard the story so many times I feel like I do remember it." "I remember every detail," Levi said, his hand finding Beatrice's automatically, their fingers interlacing with the ease of decades of practice. "Your mother was sitting on that train platform, holding you so tight, looking like she would fight the whole world to keep you safe. I took one look at you both and I knew my life was about to change. You saved us," Clara said softly, "both of us. We would not have survived without you." No, Levi said firmly. We saved each other. You and your mother gave me a reason to live again. You gave me a family when I thought I would spend my life alone. If anyone did the saving, it was you too. Clara reached over and took his other hand. I want you to know that you are the best father any girl could have asked for. Biology does not matter. Love matters. And you have loved me from the day you met me. That makes you my father in every way that counts. Levi's eyes filled with tears, something that happened more easily now that he was old. Being your father has been one of the greatest honors of my life, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You are an extraordinary woman, Clara, and I am so proud of everything you have become. They sat in silence for a while, the three of them, watching the prairie grass wave in the breeze. It was a comfortable silence, full of love and shared history. Finally, Clara stood and kissed each of her parents on the forehead. I should go collect those wild things I brought with me, she said with a laugh. But I am glad we had this time together. After she had gone, Beatrice turned to Levi. We did well with her. We did well with all of them, Levi said. But yes, Clara is special. She always has been. She brought us together, Beatrice said, leaning her head on his shoulder. If it had not been for her, I never would have answered that advertisement. I never would have gotten on that train. I never would have been stranded on that platform. I never would have met you. Then I owe Clara a debt I can never repay, Levi said, kissing the top of his wife's head. She brought me you. She brought me everything. They sat together as the afternoon faded into evening. Two old people who had loved each other for more than 50 years, and who loved each other still with a depth and constancy that was rare and beautiful. They had been through so much together. They had raised children and built a legacy. They had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical. They had grown old together, their bodies weakening even as their love remained strong, and they knew, without speaking of it, that their time together was growing shorter. They could feel it in their bones, in the increasing aches and pains, in the way simple tasks took longer than they used to. But they did not fear it. They had lived full, rich lives. They had loved deeply and been loved in return. They had no regrets, no unfinished business. When the time came, they would be ready, but that time was not yet. For now, they still had each other. They still had their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They still had their home and their memories and their enduring love. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Levi turned to Beatrice and said, "Do you know what I was thinking today?" "Tell me," she said, her hand warm in his. "I was thinking about that moment on the platform. The moment when I looked at you and Clara and said then, 'We are three.' I was thinking about how terrified I was making that offer, how I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I was thinking about how it was the best decision I ever made in my entire life. Everything good that has happened to me, every moment of joy and love and fulfillment, it all started with those 4 words." Beatrice smiled, that same beautiful smile that had captivated him all those decades ago. "Those 4 words changed my life too. They gave me hope when I had none. They gave me a future when I thought I had lost everything. They gave me you. We gave each other everything," Levi said. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every challenge, every joy and sorrow, I would choose you and Clara in this life 1,000,000 times over." "Me too," Beatrice whispered. "Always and forever I would choose you." They kissed then, a soft, gentle kiss that held decades of love and commitment. And then they sat together in the darkness, holding hands, watching the stars, grateful beyond measure for the life they had shared and the love that would endure long after they were gone. The seasons turned. Another winter came and went. Then spring returned with its promise of renewal and new life. Levi and Beatrice Quinn celebrated their 55th wedding anniversary surrounded by their family, a gathering so large it filled their house to bursting and spilled out into the yard. There were children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, 4 generations of love and laughter and life. As Levi looked around at all those faces, seeing his features and Beatrice's reflected back in different combinations, seeing the legacy they had created together, he felt a peace settle over him. This was what it had all been for, not the ranch or the money or any material success. These people. This love that would continue long after he and Beatrice were just memories and stories told to children on summer evenings. He found Beatrice in the crowd and their eyes met across the room. She smiled at him, and he smiled back, and in that moment no words were needed. They understood each other completely, as only 2 people who have shared a lifetime together can. They were both thinking the same thing. They were both feeling the same gratitude, the same wonder at how lucky they had been. That night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet again, they lay together in their bed in the room where they had spent every night of their married life. Beatrice was nestled against Levi's side, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. They were both tired from the long day of celebration, but it was a good tired, the kind that comes from being surrounded by love. "Levi," Beatrice said softly. "Yes, my love, thank you. For what? For everything. For seeing me on that platform and choosing to help. For offering us a home and a future. For loving Clara as your own. For giving me more children and a life beyond anything I ever dreamed possible. For 55 years of love and partnership and joy. For everything." Levi tightened his arm around her. "I should be thanking you. You made me whole, Beatrice. You filled all the empty spaces in my heart. You gave me a reason to wake up every morning with gratitude and joy. You made my life worth living." "We were meant to find each other," Beatrice said with certainty. "Against all odds, across all the miles and chances and coincidences, we were meant to be together. I truly believe that." "So do I," Levi said. "I think some love stories are written in the stars long before the people involved ever meet. I think ours was one of those stories. We were always going to find each other. We were always going to be 3, and then so much more." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, 2 souls so intertwined that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. And when morning came, they woke together, grateful for another day, another chance to love each other, another sunrise over the prairie that had been the backdrop to their remarkable love story. Levi Quinn passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cold January morning, 2 months shy of his 80th birthday. Beatrice woke to find him gone, his hand still holding hers, a slight smile on his weathered face. She did not cry or scream or rail against the injustice of it. She simply sat with him for a long time, memorizing his beloved features one last time, telling him all the things she had told him 1,000 times before but wanted to say once more. "I love you," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "I will always love you. Thank you for 57 years of happiness. Thank you for being the man who said then we are 3 and changed my whole world. I will carry you in my heart until the day we are together again." The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the territory. Levi Quinn had been respected and beloved, known for his fairness, his kindness, his quiet strength. But it was his family who felt his loss most keenly. His children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren wept for the man who had been the center of their world, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Clara, now 60 herself, stood at her mother's side throughout it all, supporting her just as Beatrice had supported her so many years ago. "He loved you so much," she told her mother at the graveside. "Every day of his life he loved you with his whole heart." "I know," Beatrice said, her voice steady despite her grief. "And I loved him the same way. We were blessed, Clara. So many people go through their whole lives never experiencing a love like ours. We had it for 57 years. I will not waste what time I have left grieving. I will spend it being grateful." And she did. Beatrice Quinn lived another 3 years after her husband's death, years she spent surrounded by her family, telling stories about Levi and their life together, making sure that his memory would live on in every generation that followed. She was present and engaged, still teaching her great-grandchildren their letters and numbers, still tending her garden, still finding joy in the simple pleasures of life. But everyone could see that a light had gone out of her. Without Levi, she was incomplete, a shadow of her former vibrant self. She functioned, she smiled, she went through the motions of living. But she was no longer truly alive. She was simply waiting, patiently and without complaint, for the day when she could be reunited with her beloved husband. That day came on a warm spring morning in May, exactly 3 years and 4 months after Levi's death. Beatrice went to sleep in the bed she had shared with him for so many years, and simply did not wake up. Clara found her the next morning, peaceful and serene, her hand resting on Levi's pillow as if reaching for him even in death. They buried her next to Levi in the small cemetery outside Yankton, under a sky so blue and bright, it seemed like heaven itself was celebrating their reunion. And if anyone had looked closely at Beatrice's face in that final moment, they would have sworn she was smiling as if she could already see him waiting for her, arms open, ready to hold her again at last. The ranch stayed in the family, as Levi and Beatrice had always wanted. Lucas and his children ran it with the same care and dedication that Levi had shown, honoring his legacy with every decision they made. The house remained a gathering place for the family, full of laughter and love, and the sounds of new generations growing up in the same rooms where their ancestors had lived and loved. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the prairie, some of the family swore they could hear music, a man and woman dancing in the kitchen, their laughter carried on the breeze. It was a comforting sound, a reminder that the love between Levi and Beatrice Quinn had been so strong, so true, that it had left an imprint on the very land itself. Their story was told and retold through the years, passed down from grandparents to grandchildren, from one generation to the next. It became a family legend, the tale of how a cowboy saw a woman in need on a train platform and said 4 words that would echo through time. "Then we are 3. Those words had started everything. They had been a promise and a prophecy. They had been the beginning of a love story that would span nearly 6 decades and touch countless lives. They had been simple words, spoken in a moment of compassion and instinct, but they had carried the weight of destiny. And in the end, that was what Levi and Beatrice's story taught every generation that came after them. That love begins with choice. The choice to see someone who needs help and offer it. The choice to open your heart despite fear and uncertainty. The choice to take a chance on another person, on a future that is unknown and potentially difficult. The choice to be brave enough to say yes to love, even when every logical reason says you should walk away. Levi had made that choice on a train platform in 1878, looking at a desperate woman and a tiny baby, and choosing to help instead of walking away. Beatrice had made that choice too, taking the hand of a stranger and trusting him to keep her and Clara safe. And from those 2 choices, made in the space of a few heartbeats, had grown a love that would endure for generations, a family that would spread across the Dakota territory and beyond, a legacy of kindness and compassion and devotion that would never fade. Years after Beatrice died, when Clara herself was an old woman surrounded by her own children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told the story one more time. It was at a family gathering, much like the ones Levi and Beatrice used to host, and the younger generations had asked to hear about their famous ancestors, the couple whose love story had become the stuff of family legend. Clara settled into her chair, her eyes distant with memory, and began to speak. "It was September of 1878, she said, and my mother was sitting on a train platform in Yankton, holding me in her arms and believing her life was over. She had been promised a job that did not exist. She had $4 to her name, and she had a baby who depended on her for everything. She was terrified and alone and out of options." The children and grandchildren gathered around leaned forward, captivated by the story they had heard many times before but never tired of hearing again. "And then a cowboy rode into town," Clara continued, a smile playing at her lips. "His name was Levi Quinn, and he had just returned from a cattle drive. He could have ridden right past that platform. He could have looked at my mother and decided her problems were not his concern. But he did not. He saw two people who needed help, and he chose to offer it, even though doing so would change his entire life." "What did he say?" one of the youngest children asked, though she already knew the answer. Clara's smile widened. "He looked at my mother and me, and he said, 'Then we are three.'" Just like that. 4 simple words that bound us together as a family from that moment forward. My mother accepted his help, even though she had every reason to be wary of a stranger. She chose to trust him, to take a chance on him. And from that trust, from that one moment of connection, grew the greatest love story I have ever known. She paused, looking around at all the faces watching her, seeing the family that had grown from that moment on the platform. "They loved each other until the day they died," she said softly. "Through good times and hard times, through raising children and building a life together, through growing old and facing everything that life threw at them. They loved each other completely, devotedly, with a constancy that never wavered. And they taught all of us what real love looks like. Not the easy, romantic kind of love you read about in books, but the hard, committed, everyday kind of love that chooses the other person over and over again, through all the years and all the challenges." "Were they really as wonderful as the stories say?" another child asked. Clara considered this carefully. "They were not perfect," she said honestly. "They had flaws and made mistakes just like everyone does, but they were wonderful in the ways that mattered. They were kind. They were generous. They saw people who needed help and they offered it, without expectation of reward. And they loved their family with a fierceness that protected us and shaped us and made us who we are today." She looked at each face gathered around her, seeing traces of both Levi and Beatrice in different features, different expressions. "You all carry them with you," she said. "In your faces and your hearts and your actions. The legacy they left is not just this ranch or this family name. It is the example they set of how to live a good life, how to love well, how to make choices based on compassion rather than fear. That is what 'Then we are three' really means. It means choosing love. It means choosing family. It means choosing to bind yourself to others and to care for them as if they were your own. That was their gift to us, and it is the gift we must pass on to future generations." The gathering was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of those words. Then the children scattered to play, carrying with them the story they would one day tell their own children and grandchildren. And Clara sat in her chair, tired but content, knowing that she had done her part to keep the memory of Levi and Beatrice Quinn alive. Because that was what love did. It endured. It persisted. It echoed through time, touching lives that would never even exist without it. The love between Levi and Beatrice had started with a chance meeting and 4 simple words, but it had grown into something vast and enduring, something that would never truly die as long as there were people who remembered it and honored it and tried to live up to its example. Then we are 3. Those words had been the beginning, and in a way, they would never end. Because the family that had started with a cowboy, a woman, and a baby on a train platform in 1878 would continue to grow and thrive and spread. The love that had started in that moment would continue to ripple outward, generation after generation, touching lives in ways both big and small. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when their earthly journey is complete, Levi and Beatrice Quinn were together still, watching over the family they had created, proud beyond measure of the legacy they had left behind. They had started as 3. They had become so much more. And their love story, that beautiful, improbable, perfect love story, would live on forever in the hearts of all those who came after them. It was the kind of love that changed everything. The kind of love that started with kindness and grew into devotion. The kind of love that faced every obstacle and emerged stronger. The kind of love that built legacies and created families and gave meaning to every moment. It was the kind of love that began with a cowboy finding a new bride cradling a baby on a platform and saying 4 words that would echo through eternity. Then we are 3, and they were. Forever and always, they were 3. A family bound by choice and love and the courage to take a chance on each other. A family that would endure through all the years to come, a testament to the power of compassion and the beauty of a love that chooses, over and over again, to stay. That was their story. That was their legacy. That was the gift they gave to every generation that followed, and it was more than enough. It was everything.